What's up, everybody? This is Pastor John
and Pastor Rob
with some urban
discipleship.
Right.
Yes. So we wanted to take some time to come together and not be deaf to what's going on in society. We want to talk a little bit about the death of George Floyd.
Right.
We know that he was killed by police officers in Minneapolis during an arrest where multiple police officers had their knees on him, and I believe in the worst case being on his neck
for about like 7 minutes or something.
7 minutes. That's insane.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to offer some perspective from our urban context, from a Christian context, and maybe even from a pastoral context. I want to hear your general thoughts.
My general thoughts was sad, and like you just kind of fight back the tears because, like, again, you know, like your heart is broken in that way. And then you try to process it, right? So you go from just the raw emotion of it to then trying to process it as a Christian. And my first thought is, man, I know my heart ought to go to the gospel, but I'm like, man, in this moment, the gospel doesn't feel like enough. I know that's a sinful thought, and I know that it's unheard of, but the gospel feel like it wasn't enough because I wanted vengeance. I wanted something. I wanted to be able to see retribution.
That's right.
Right? But the Bible tells us that vengeance is the Lord's, and that we ought to, in those moments, give ourselves to grace and to give ourselves to understanding that the gospel ought to direct how we engage with life's tragedies.
Right. So I think that's powerful, and I'm often reminded of my time in grad school and seminary and dealing with these issues and different issues. They would instruct us to make a distinction between your theological response and or even your philosophical response and your pastoral response. Right. So I understand my theological response. As I look at these events, I understand we live in a fallen world. I explained it as being a sinking ship. We want justice. We want truth and righteousness to break out, but understanding it, in a perfect world where we could come to a point where we end racism and end injustice, especially for black people here in America, understand that when we plug that hole, another hole starts to leak, just because we are human, and because we are human beings, fallen human beings, we're naturally going to descend into chaos and sin, and so I know that's true theologically.
Right.
However, I know that when I'm pastoring people, that's not necessarily the angle you want to take with them, because these people are hurting, these people are worried. I mean, I have 2 daughters, but I can only imagine how my mom felt about me, and how people in our church feel about their sons, should they ever find themselves in that position. And so pastorally, we speak to that in the manner of we instruct them to teach your sons to be aware of their surroundings, how to it sucks that we as blacks in America have to have these conversations with our children, but we do. We have to teach them how listen, there's police officers out there who are supposed to be trained in de-escalation, but it seems like they choose escalation. So you, as a black young man, you need to be competent in de-escalation.
Yeah, and then Rob, like, just even as we think about it as Christians, it's not escapism to let our minds wander to the glories of the second coming.
That's right.
That it almost gives us a reason to fight now, because ultimately it'll all be made right. But Christ is not going to reign then. He is reigning now, and he can, through our efforts, bring some sort of racial reconciliation, some sort of a sense of justice as it relates to the black people and their involvement with the law enforcement, and even some of the systemic issues that we see because of the institutions of our nation. God can bring peace and resolve in those moments, so we fight.
That's right.
We fight. This is not escapism where we say, oh, we're waiting for heaven. No, we fight. We fight because we understand that Christ has already won, and he's reigning, and he cares for human flourishing.
And even while you're speaking, I'm thinking, well, how do you fight? I think as we look out onto society, we have a sense, we get a sense of feeling helpless because we feel like we can't do anything about it. But that's when we need to narrow our focus and focus on those that we are connected to. Each of us, some point in our life, are going to interact with someone who is white, with someone who might be a police officer, and those are the moments where we can take our opportunity to make the world a better place.
Right.
We may not be able to affect change in Minneapolis, but if you're pulled over, if you know someone who is facing those things, you can support them. You can work with people who have a different perspective of you, be it racial or a governmental, and how do we police neighborhoods. Those are the moments where you let the love of Christ shine, and you can make the world a better place in those moments.
And then don't fear invading those spaces and those places of government, those places of power.
That's right.
Invade those places with our urban Christian perspectives, and how we understand the world, and how we understand Christ. Invade those spaces and create be part of the creation of policy that protects the disenfranchised and the alienated, in whatever way that is deemed necessary in that particular state or locality. So there's ways to fight. There's advocacy groups that you can get involved in. As Christians, we are not just to pray and to do nothing, but our prayers ought to be followed by action that's thought through, right? But action nonetheless.
Correct. And I'll say one more thing. Civil unrest or this idea of bringing justice to society is not something that is foreign to Christian history. In fact, Christians have always cared about civil rights and human rights. And if you look at the research of Robert Woodbury, he details how human rights and human flourishing followed Christian missionaries all throughout the history of the church.
And we just want you guys to know that we are mourning with you, that our heart breaks as we watch the video. Our heart breaks over Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. 2020 has been a tragic year for us as a people, but our love for Christ is strong.
That's right.
And we're not going to waver because we know that true peace is found in our Lord. So we love you guys, and we always want you to do two things, guys.
That's right.
Love God
and each other.
Peace.